You know that feeling, right? That pull between your own ambitions and your family life? That classic tension between the freedom to go after something huge and, well, the responsibilities that come with commitment. It feels like such a modern problem, doesn't it? But get this. 400 years ago, the philosopher Francis Bacon tackled this exact same thing, but with this incredibly cold, hard logic. So let's dive into his very calculated perspective. So, what if you just set aside all the romance, all the emotion, and treated marriage like a business decision? You know, a strategic choice with clear pluses and minuses. Well, that is exactly what Bacon did. And believe me, his analysis is just as provocative today as it was way back in the 1600s.
All right, so here's the game plan. First, we'll get into Bacon's world and why he even wrote this essay. Then we'll look at his case for freedom, the single life. After that, we'll see the other side, the discipline of marriage. We'll touch on his interesting view of a wife's role through the seasons of life. And finally, we'll wrap up with the philosopher's final, very puzzling word.
Okay, so first things first. To really get what Bacon is talking about, we have to travel back in time, into his world. See, this essay wasn't just some abstract thought experiment. He was actually responding to a massive cultural shift that was happening all around him. And that context, it is absolutely key to understanding his entire argument. So, think about the Renaissance, right? It was this incredible explosion of new ideas, art, and science. But all that change, it really shook up the old traditions. People started to value personal freedom and, yeah, pleasure a lot more. And for some, the whole institution of marriage started to look like, as they said, just a ceremonial toy. So Bacon's essay, it wasn't just him thinking out loud. It was a direct commentary on the world he was living in. So Bacon looks at all this and decides to approach it not with his heart, but completely with his head. He uses what we'd call a utilitarian framework. Basically, he's always asking, what's the practical use here? For him, marriage isn't about love. It's a balance sheet, it's about assets and liabilities. So let's take a look at the first side of his ledger. All right, so Bacon kicks things off with a really powerful argument for staying single. He focuses entirely on what a person gains when they avoid the ties of family. And here it is. This is probably his most famous line from the whole essay, and man, it's a gut punch. He that hath wife and children hath given hostages to fortune. Wow. He's saying that when you have a family, you've basically given fate a weapon to use against you, a way to control you. So what does he really mean by hostages? Well, for Bacon, family commitments are roadblocks. They get in the way of great enterprises. They stop you from taking big risks, whether you're trying to do something noble or something a little wicked. He thinks married men just have to accept their lot in life. You're no longer the captain of your own ship. You're anchored by all these responsibilities. And he takes this idea even further. Bacon argues that unmarried and childless men are the ones who have given the greatest gifts to the public. Why? Because all their affection, all their wealth isn't being poured into their own family. Instead, they can endow the public with it. In his view, their legacy is their children. They kind of marry society itself. This really lays out the trade-offs he sees. On the one hand, you've got the unmarried man. He thinks they make the best friends, the best masters, and the best servants. But they can also be unstable citizens. With no real ties, they're light to run away. On the other hand, the married man is constrained by his duties, but that also makes him more careful about the future. And while the single man might be more charitable with his money, Bacon says the married man is actually less cruel, less hard-hearted. So you can already see, this is not a simple choice. Okay, so we've seen the assets of a single life. Let's flip over to the other side of the balance sheet now. Because after making this really strong case for freedom, Bacon pivots. He starts to argue that marriage actually has this crucial, kind of civilizing effect on a person. And here's the perfect counterpoint to that whole hostages to fortune idea. Certainly, wife and children are a kind of discipline of humanity. See? Here, family isn't a negative restraint. It's a positive one. It's like a form of training, a discipline that actually makes you a better human being. And this is the crucial counterweight. He says, sure, single men might give more money away, but they can also become really cruel and hard-hearted. In fact, he says they make perfect, severe inquisitors. A family man, though, his tenderness is oft called upon. He's constantly having to practice being gentle and caring. And that daily discipline, Bacon thinks, softens his nature and keeps his harsher side in check. And check out how practical he gets with his logic, breaking it down by profession. For clergymen, he says nope, no marriage. Their charity needs to serve the public, not just fill a pool at home. For judges, he's like, nah, it doesn't matter. A corrupt judge is going to be corrupt either way. But for soldiers, yes, absolutely. It gives them a reason to fight and tempers their recklessness. It's just pure, cold, utilitarian logic. Okay, so now Bacon zooms in specifically on the role of a wife, and his perspective is, yet again, incredibly pragmatic. He basically outlines her value to a man across his entire lifetime. Now, this is one of the most famous and, let's be honest, probably most controversial parts of the essay. He breaks it down into 3 ages. In a man's youth, he says, a wife is a mistress. In his middle age, she becomes a companion. And in old age, she's a nurse. It's a really stark, functional view of a partner's role, right? But for Bacon, it leads to, it seems like, a very simple conclusion.
So if you're following his logic, it seems pretty clear. If a wife is useful at every single stage of a man's life, then the takeaway is simple. A man should always marry, no matter how old he is. The debate's over, case closed, right? But this is where Bacon, the master essayist that he is, completely pulls the rug out from under you with one last, baffling thought.
Yeah, just when we think we finally have the answer, Bacon leaves us with this total paradox that throws everything we've just talked about into question. He wraps things up by quoting the ancient Greek philosopher Thales. Someone asked Thales when the right time to marry is, and he replied, "A young man not yet, an elder man not at all." The implication, of course, is there's never a right time to get married.
And you know what? That's the real genius of this essay. Bacon isn't trying to give you advice. He's giving you a tool. His whole point was to just lay out the pros and cons, the assets and liabilities, with total, brutal honesty. He hands you the balance sheet, but the final calculation, well, that's completely up to you.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question for today, doesn't it? I mean, 400 years later, in a world that's all about romantic love, but also has things like prenups and very rational debates about moving in together, is there still value in Bacon's cold logic? Should we be thinking about one of the biggest decisions of our lives, a little less with our hearts, and maybe just a little more with our heads?